And welcome to another Lean Focus webinar entitled Achieving Competitive Advantage with Strategy Deployment. My name is Damon Baker and I will be your moderator for this session. In a minute, I will introduce our panelist, Dr. Christian Artmann, who will be delivering the presentation. A few announcements. If you'll notice in the handouts section of the GoToWebinar panel, there are 3 handouts that you can actually download that support this presentation. One of them is a client overview presentation that explains Lean Focus and what we do with our clients. The other 2 topics in the handout section are related to this webinar in particular. The first one is about our strategic planning process, and the second handout available there is related to our strategy deployment process. So you can download those at your convenience during this presentation. We will have a Q&A, questions and answers section at the end of this presentation today, and I will be moderating the chat. So if you can type your questions in at that point, and I will read those questions to the panelist and he will answer those questions as well. Upon the conclusion of this webinar, the recording will be made available to those who either enrolled and attended or those who enrolled and were unable to attend due to scheduling issues. That will be emailed to you alongside of the recording, so you'll have this recording to watch at any future time. And then additionally, we always post a link to this webinar recording on our LinkedIn company page, so you can access it from there as well. So without further ado, let me introduce my colleague, Dr. Christian Artmann. Christian, take it away.
Yes, I take over. Can you hear me, everyone? Okay. Yep. My name is Christian. As said, my background is technical systems management and business administration. And then I spent about 25 years in executive positions in the industry. And during that time, I had about 10 years of rock solid experience with strategy deployment, hands-on, so in real life. And then at the end of that period, I thought it's time to do something different. So I went back to university, to the PhD. And during the PhD, I've really interviewed a lot of ex-corporate leaders, colleagues of mine in other companies. And they've basically all, I would say, installed this policy or strategy deployment into their organization. And that gave me a very clear hands up that there's much more to it than just what I experienced in my 10 years of real life experience. And then I decided to make this my profession. And since a couple of years, I work together with Lean Focus and we help companies on the way to get there. Now, I'll say this question is about what is it really? And what is it not, and what I would say sometimes, irritating news, which you can find on different websites. So let's get started. We would like to, and here I can go to my presentation. Can people, oops. It all goes back. Why can't I get my presentation up and running? Oops, used to be up and running. It always comes back.
Let me, I can show it from my screen.
It's here already. So you have it? You see it?
Yep, got you.
Cool. So I would do a brief introduction. What does it do for the business? And I think very important, why does it work this way? Then we basically go into some details to show you quickly what the strategy deployment really is, and also how to get started. And hopefully we have enough time for a good question and answer. And please place any question you want. It's very important that we really clarify your points. So a brief summary on the history. I mean, you might know that policy deployment does not fall from heaven. It has been developed on the one hand side, as you can see, on more or less data-driven things like Hoshinkanri, total quality, Six Sigma. But there's a very strong second stream, which are behavioral aspects. And today I would also like to speak about what are the learnings on the behavioral side beyond what you can see as a more hard data and Six Sigma driven things. But of course, it has continued. So examples from this company range from, I would say, big giant companies like you can see here. I mean, you know, Toyota, Honeywell, and you might think that this tool or methodology is only something for big companies. But in my customer portfolio, I have, for example, a company called Neos IT here in Munich, about 150 people. I also work in restructuring cases where companies maybe in the size of 10, 20 million users. So we do have experience on the one hand side, the corporate level, mid-sized company level, but even small and startup level. And it has provided for all of them some kind of guidance on giving priority and driving the business up faster than their competition left and right. So what is really strategy deployment? What is it really? It's a way to better execute your strategy. It is not something to build your strategy. But once you have some thoughts of what could be the strategy, you can definitely start and should start with strategy deployment to get it concrete, touchable, and get it down to earth. And the companies here on this screen have done this or continue doing so. Some of the colleagues of Intersolvent are my couple of friends, so we have good relations. The Eurenfrons project I made myself. I've basically worked with them, and we have implemented this in a couple of installations over the last years. So they are heavy users of this, and I think the other companies you know yourself. So in that background, I think it's important to spend some time on this overview. It might read easy, but these are really essential things. Strategy deployment is really successful because it drives a winning spirit into the organization across the layers. We've seen this anytime we really implement this. After a couple of, I would say, months, half a year or so, people change their attitude. Aspiration goes up, and the culture is shaped towards a more we can do culture, more active thing. As I said, I also work in restructuring, and in restructuring, you quite often do a lot of PowerPoint presentation to banks and to other people. Well, PowerPoint is easy, but it's not action. And what this model does, it really drives the actions, and therefore it develops a culture towards action. That translates in real term, when it comes to real life, to countermeasuring. So whenever you have a problem, it's nice to say you have a problem. Most important is to get a countermeasure installed. That is a mentality thing. And I just had a session last week with a larger German company, about 200 million, which was never used to a countermeasure mentality. And they start learning this right now, and you can see the success instantly. That also means certain elements are agile. Because if you really have a culture of let's do it and let's countermeasure it, that can you also call agile, in a sense, fail fast. And of course, it means it does change the management behavior, undoubtable. And that's why I think if you start this journey, you need to think about yourself. Are we willing as a team to change our behavior? Or do we think everything is great and should stay the way it is? Depends on where you are. If you say, well, maybe we can develop also as a management team, then strategy deployment is probably the right thing to do. And of course, the hard elements. I mean, it does based on data and reporting. In many companies that does exist, so it's not something new. But it's a little bit more new is to break down a strategy into real numbers and real actions. So a strategy is not anymore PowerPoint, which is about the future and what people could do. It really defines what are we going to do in a much different way, in a much more concrete way. And really it gives much more structure and priority. And breaking down a strategy, we have experienced, is not easy in some organizations. It does require good attention and even coaching. Then comes a very special element is the separation between financial targets and operative targets. Very important. Financial targets in most companies are late runners. They come long after the problem has taken place. And therefore, the model of strategy deployment is based on operative targets as well. That means we try to have early warning indicators that give us, before the problems becomes financially visible, an indicator, are we on the right track or not? And that ties pretty nicely to this agile concept. In a sense, fail fast. So operative targets are usually set on a stretched level. They're not easy to achieve. They're really, really stretched. And they drive the organization. They drive everything. And separating into financial targets and operative is rather unique to this model. Very different to what you have in the balanced scorecard approach. So why do we do all that? It's because we would like, with this approach, to implement a new, I would say, set of know-how of learnings, of procedural learnings into the organization, which means the company learns to set himself higher aspiration of targets. So if the situation today is here and where you are, and as I said, sometimes I work in restructuring, so obviously the case isn't great. So basically, yes, we start here. So it has to go up a level to become world-class standard. And getting this aspiration, we are working in this company to become world-class, is part of this behavior, agile, countermeasuring mentality. And really, it's essential. Now, I think the next question might be, what is it really? And now let's get more concrete. First of all, it does contain an alignment procedure where we work with the teams to really align a strategic plan. That is a certain exercise, certain things we do with the team to really align. Then the alignment is documented in something what you can see in the middle ground. That is called the famous X matrix, and sometimes people confuse and call the X matrix strategy deployment. No, the X matrix is one small element in strategy deployment. It is also surrounded by data tables and so on. So it's a data engine in the middle. And of course, on the right-hand side, this is what I think is, in my experience, the most important part, is to agree values, certain rules, routines, and to apply rigor in thinking to drive the results. And the last step normally is a step that really takes longer. In our experience, after initial setup, at least half a year to get that kind of cascading in the readers and the reader into the mindset of the people. It does take time. So on the next detail comes, I would say, there's a key slide which we use in our installation sessions. It's a very simple, only 4 terms, that looks very easy, but there's really strong meaning behind. First of all, we need to agree the value of transparency. That really means, are you really willing to share the business results with all of your employees on a frequent basis? Are people willing to share success stories? Yes, it's easy, but are they also willing to share failures? Do we have a failure culture? If not, it needs to be developed as part of this transition. So transparency reads easy, but during our implementation time, we always have to come back to that agreement we made maybe half a year ago. Then cooperation and team play. It's a quite easy measure if you think, or if you want to test if your team is playing as a team. For example, if you go to the action plan of a larger project and you look at the action items, and then you check if this action item is only executable by the own team, or is he doing a cross-functional connection with other team members, left and right? And do the other team members are really informed about what they need to contribute to his action plan? If there's a high level of this exchange, level of cooperation is assumingly rather high. The companies I work for and what I've seen is that most of them, they write an action plan for themselves, hopefully them share them, but not with the other team members. So cooperation also means cross-team cooperation, cross-organizational and cross-functional cooperation. And that is strongly required to be implemented with this deployment. The next one is reflection. That sounds easy, but reflection really means, and we have done some training sessions, modules for that, that managers, and I speak about managers, need to learn about, talk about mistakes, things that have not worked so nicely. So that goes together with transparency. A little anecdote from my implementation with the Word Chemical Group. We really had people, senior managers, who had not been able in a board meeting to make any mistake. So they're not transparent and they're not reflective. everything was great in their mind, despite the numbers, especially the operative numbers, show something different. And therefore, to remind, hey guys, we play a reflection game. That's the rule we gave us. The next one is true commitment. And I see the difference of commitment is sometimes maybe even language. My feeling is that the German translation of commitment is much stronger than the American term. So that's why we said we mean true commitment. That means really, if I say the project is right on Friday afternoon, it is right on Friday afternoon and not on Monday morning. And this level of real commitment is something which is basically strongly enforced by a strategy deployment. So this is a key page, and we always come back to the key page. From that, we develop in our setup normally some behavioral rules with the team members. So we try to agree in the very early implementation sessions, the first 2 sessions, some rules. For example, openness, of course, speak about your problems. The next one is focus. Many companies have too many topics on the plate, and strategy deployment, by the nature of the structure, requires you to focus. You cannot have more than 6, 7 priorities. It's not designed for that, which means people really have to think what is really important, what can we not do, and what is basically daily business and not strategy, because people also confuse sometimes daily business and strategy. So basically, focusing exercises help on that, and the technicalities of the system are designed for that. The next point is, as I said before, is cross-functional. As I said, we really do check with the people the action plans, and we develop with the teams action plans which are truly cross-functional. And as said, this helps to align the organization behind the strategy. If an action plan is only single functional, there is no alignment. Then comes an important point, which I call normally demanding objectives. What could that be? Most of us have been in business schools, and we have all learned this famous story about SMART rules. So SMART targets, sorry. So when you are designing whatever kind of objective, make them SMART. So specific, measurable, somehow achievable, and so on. What do people do in practice? They really say, well, let's assume I give 100% of performance and everything goes okay. I get my 100% bonus. Cool. But honestly, if I put in only 90%, I would still get 100% of the bonus. And normally, and you all know that, the targets are normally negotiated downwards, which you cannot avoid. Within the system here, and we spoke about operative targets, which are maybe not so much tied to the whatever income of the people is. Here you go for demanding objectives. You set your objectives much higher. And therefore, it's called stretch. And in any functioning installation of policy deployment or of strategy deployment, people go for demanding objectives beyond the 100%. Why? In normal life, things don't work the way they should. You have competition, you have changes in the market, but you have also sometimes just luck, backwind. So those who played the 100% game nicely and get some backwind get accidental money. Those who got, let's say, accidental front win, not get their bonus. That is unfair in a sense. And therefore, we within strategy deployment, we work with the teams to set stretched/demanding objectives. This is now a consequence, because then it's very likely that these objectives will turn red during the course of the year. And so we need to agree as well the rule that red is okay. It doesn't mean that red is good, but we accept something to turn red. Because what we expect if something is going red, if we understand why has it gone red, and is there any creative path to get a little bit less red. And here I would say, I remember Larry Culp, my former boss at Danaher, he said, really, Christian, if you can't make the 100% target because of the global economic crisis, good, then we write off from this target 50%. Okay, but please tell me, and that is now your focus, turn the other 50 back to 60, 70%. That is your focus. And therefore, yes, at the end of the year, I was still red, measured against the 100, but better than I initially thought. And so red is okay is part of the cultural change of strategy deployment. Interesting enough, we did an article in China, and it was published in China until the headline, red is okay. That is a little anecdote, and I'm still not arrested by the Chinese government. Hopefully it remains. Good. What does it mean now in terms of cascading? Of course, these strategies, the focus, the cross-functional action plans, and the red is okay philosophy has to cascade down into the organization. I would say over time, my experience is that in the first year, you mostly keep it on level 1, so on the senior level, whoever is starting strategy deployment, and only when the team members, so the senior team members, can handle the rules on this screen, we start cascading. That also means after a while, when you have implemented this, you need to stay with that system for a while. So yes, it is a big change for the people, but please do not forget it needs to stabilize. So when you stay in procedures, when you change processes, it's always about change and stabilization. And then in the session, as you can see it quite openly, we do a little quick check. Are you really committed? And we try to keep that in our records, because when it comes to real implementation, we can go back to these rules and apply them in the daily life. So how would daily life look now? As I said, the first thing is to translate the strategy into something tangible. And therefore, this famous X matrix have been developed, and maybe some of you have heard about this. As I said, it is not strategy deployment, it's part of strategy deployment. 1/4, to be honest. So this X matrix is description. In the south, you can figure out the what to achieve. So what to achieve on the long run. And normally you put down there financial KPIs. So what are really the long-term financial targets of this organization? They should come from the strategy, but not always. Then to the west, how far will we go in the next year? And you really have to define the breakdown of the longer term targets into annual targets. Again, most of them are usually financially. And we found quite interesting that even well-managed companies, when you just ask the simple questions, what are your top 5 priorities financially in the future, and what is the annual conclusion of that, it's this struggle. Because this model, as you can see here, it asks for first priority, second, third priority, and so on. So it does force the organization to give financial targets into a sequence of order. That is important because we will sooner or later have decisions where it goes for the last euro to spend, or the last dollar to spend, or the last minute to spend. And if then people in the organization don't have a clear objective and the sequence of objective, the one goes for cash collection and the other goes for whatever cost reduction. But the same money has been spent. So there are many examples during the implementation where the decision on the priority of financial objectives has a severe impact on daily behavior. So within this approach, we try to preempt that decision very early on, because it does lead then to the annual priorities. And in the north comes now the important question: how are we going to achieve that? And here we do work with the organizations to figure out 4, 5, maybe 6, but certainly not 8 or 10 priorities to improve. And these are normally cross-functional, cross-divisional major improvements of capabilities of the organization. For example, it is not about how to, let's say, open a new subsidiary in Poland. It would rather be how to build our skills to open subsidiaries in Eastern Europe, and we start with Poland. So the capability is about opening up priority, let's say, subsidiaries in the countries, not just Poland. So in the north, we normally place with the team members fundamental improvements of the company capabilities. So to the east comes the point which I mentioned, operative improvements. So how much are we improving on an ongoing basis before we can see financial impacts? And here we try to implement for every improvement priority 2 or 3 so-called targets to improve, or key change indicator, or let's say sub-targets on an operative level. To give an example from the cycle, if I start in the south and I would like to grow my business by X% over 5 years, on the short run, I need to grow the business in my, let's say, in my base country. I have to grow in my new product development area and in a certain region. So from a 3-year objective, I might derive 3 annual objectives. Then I have to define how am I going to do this. Let's say by driving superior pre-lead management in the sales arena, kind of doing a lot of pre-marketing, do a lot of whatever customer consulting to really generate leads. So we focus on the pre-lead phase in order to get the revenue. So what could be then an early indicator? Of course, number of leads in an early stage, because only if I have sufficient number in early stage, it does show that my strategy gets implemented. It does show that my short-term revenue goes up, and with that goes my long-term revenue up. But if I miss on generating sufficient pre-early leads, the entire thing doesn't fly. And therefore, we try to develop early indicators with the teams as a precision of the strategy. So again, this is all about preparing strategy to execution. And it starts with the famous X matrix. For every improvement priority, the teams will write one specific strategic program for execution. So every priority has a second page, which is a high-level action plan for implementation. This is very important because this high-level action plan for implementation needs to tie with the financial numbers on the left and the operative numbers on the right-hand side. That is basically chicken and the egg problem. And only when that is aligned, we can be sure it will be implemented the way we think. So indeed, as I said, we will have critical priorities in the south, annual targets in the west, improved priorities in the north, targets to measure the progress in the west, and then of course we assign resources. That will all at the end up, interesting enough, in a simple Excel tool. And I'm always get the questions, why don't we use a PMO tool, Christian? Why don't we use a system tracking tool? My observation is, as soon as we start about a software for that, people get derailed. They start about the software rather than the content. I had a very nice conversation in January with an automotive company who would like to use a big software tool for that. I said, basically, a shitty action plan remains a shitty action plan. It's an MS project or any other thing. Here, we would like to focus the organization on the big things and write a high-level action plan on a high-level program. If for any detail later on, you might need a breakdown into MS project or any other action planning tool, that is fine, but first align on the big picture. And therefore, we are very happy with an Excel tool, which is designed like this. The Excel tool has the X matrix with the financials, as you've seen before. It does have a bowler, a simple Excel table with plan to target numbers for the financials, KPIs, for the operative things. It has one tab for each strategic program. And in case we are going to miss numbers, or let's say we don't make our targets, we need to have a countermeasure. And we have good experience that all that is in one Excel file, because that all the information you need is at the fingertips when you speak to people. As I said, I work also in consulting, in restructuring, and I spoke about the famous PowerPoints. Well, you might put all this now again into PowerPoint, doesn't add value. And here I think it's a very important experience I made with Larry Culp. First time when I was new to this topic. Of course, we last presentation about strategy, financial targets, and everything. And then he has asked how many hours have you spent on the PowerPoint? I said, guys, we don't pay you for writing PowerPoints. We pay you for execution. And a simple KPI board with a plan number and an action number is perfectly fine for me. I need an action plan to implement and a countermeasure to go. What you see on this monitor, Christian, is all I need from you to run the business. No dog and pony show, please. And that was for me a very big learning, and indeed, with this simple information on this screen, you can run a company. That's all you need. You have the financials, the key objectives, the alignment, it's everything on. So what else to take? I think it's about soft side of the race. I spoke about the monitor, which is the hard side of the race. There's a second side, which is leadership. As I said, this does require leadership. And if you think about the rules and the values we spoke before, that is leadership, which has to be executed. We spoke about mindset change that will happen. Those people with a lean background allow this PDCA cycle. Yes, we do something. We plan something, we do it. And then we check it, and then we act, or we countermeasure, we do something about it. I've seen many companies which end up at the end on the restructuring table because they don't counteract to misses. They let the misses stand, kind of whatever, appeasement or ignorance, I don't know. And over time, the fundamentals of the companies erode. So to act or to counteract is essential as part of the becoming a great company. And of course, strategy deployment is a process by itself. On this page, I would like to highlight one specific thing. I spoke about when you miss a target and you have seen the word countermeasure on the page before. You might see countermeasure, see this here. It means whenever you have a major miss, we have a tool developed which is called reflective problem solving. So people need to understand to really reflect on the true root cause of a problem, to find out what can they do themselves about solving the problem, and only then ask others for help. This is a very impactful tool, which I think in our case also a high seller, I must say, but it's also very impactful for the companies. It's a mixture between leadership and mindset change. I would say when we did this with the World Chemical Group here in Germany, Switzerland, I think also in Austria, France was involved. They really, the MDs really said, hey guys, that is enlightening for me. Now I'm much more focused and I'm much more clear on what I can do before I ask others for help. There's also something, I can do something about my problem. I'm not victim of things which happen to me. It's a mindset change. It is very effective. So in a summary, what is strategy deployment really? What drives competitive advantage? It's a mixture of these four things. Is that you agree with the managers and constantly repeat the soft elements or core values we spoke about. We spoke about the rules and they have to be constantly iterated. Don't say because we do one training, one installation. No, it's a permanent process which we coach at the beginning and then sooner or later becomes part of the DNA of the company. Then comes the performance monitor with the famous X matrix. And here I would like to flag something. Most people think that strategy deployment is the X matrix is the performance monitor. No, it's not. It's only 1/4 of the race. It is a data backbone, which is correct, but the effect comes only when the other 3 places come into spot. And also we spoke about management guidance. We do coaching sessions with the management to apply the core values in their interaction with their teammates. We do guidance seminars with the guys to apply the rules in daily work. And the red box on this stands really for reflective problem solving. We really work with the senior guys to really understand their business problem hands-on and what are possible countermeasures by themselves. And that, again, as I said before, for most of them, a pretty enlightening thing. So how would that play over time? How to get started? As we said, there are 3 phases. Let's say a planning phase, an implementation phase, and then comes the review phase. I mean, you all know when you plan, you start something with a corporate vision or something where you would like to get. Vision is maybe not the right word. It's what is the future picture of this company? Where would we like to stand in terms of operations, our financials, our values, or what we are? Then comes, as we said before, the breakdown into objectives, and would be documented in the X matrix. So here already the X matrix forces people to think, well, on the long run, you need to define your long-term financial targets, your KPIs, maybe not more than 4 or 5. You have to give them a sort order. You need to break this down into an annual thing. You need to know what you have to change in the company to make that numbers happen. And you have to think about, well, let's develop this with, and let's say with monthly targets on the operative level. And then you take it even further down into more specific objectives, more specific priorities, and action plans. And then comes step number 4, deployment. Deployment means, first of all, we have to tell the people. I mean, you have to inform the organization. And then the management has to deploy it for themselves every single day. A biggest learning for me here is when people understand that strategy implementation is daily business. Because only when strategy deployment here, level 4 and level 5, really hits the ground, it becomes real. A strategy on a PowerPoint remains a strategy on a PowerPoint. They never change the company. So here, strategy deployment is about moving from step 4 to step 5 now. That is the essence. Now we are going to implement this. And the tricky thing is we are going to implement this on a monthly basis. Most companies don't apply this rigor of tracking the implementation of their 3-year strategy on a monthly basis. I can speak about this quite openly. Continental is one of our coaching customers. That is official information. This was for them the hardest lesson to understand, that whatever the CEO or whatever the board members agree as strategy is for many people daily work, making it happen. So implement improvement initiatives is daily work. It's the implementation of the strategy. That's why the monthly review is highly structured. It is not a come together, and it's not a PowerPoint dog and pony show. It's really looking at the bowlers, looking at the numbers, looking at the action plans, looking at the countermeasures. Very structured. Again, I think last week we had a very interesting, we called it radar meeting with a company. So it was basically a strategy deployment meeting. We called that radar for that company. And so really the people have in this session the first time really understood that not making a monthly target on a strategy implementation, which might take 4 years, will be escalated to a senior discussion, because we cannot have a slippage on a major topic without a countermeasure. People sometimes think that it's overdone, but if it is my strategy, and I decide it's important, I need to make sure I get there. And every small step is important. You might remember my first word about agile. That is the same principle as in agile. You slice down a big elephant in small things and you eat the element by piece, but you have to eat the piece. And here we really work with the team members to make the first steps and to move on with these steps. And that's why the monthly review is essential. And of course, in an annual review, so from time to time, you do an annual review, of course, you figure out on where you are and how you have to move. And of course, you reflect on your behavior. And maybe you have to change the process on how you define your priorities. Maybe your target setting was completely crazy. So you also review on a meta level the processes you have behind. So now I would like to share with you a real example of an implementation time plan. So how could that work in reality? So in reality, you might say, well, we start with some kind of an initial training. In that training, we apply the Kaizen style. That means we do something in the training which is real, which is hands-on. So we define with the team members the strategic initiatives. Now, it is important to know that we at Lean Focus, we have only senior people on board, people who knows practice. Because in this phase, we have to be active with the team members, not just as consultants, but as real business coaches, to make sure that strategic initiative is something concrete and is realistic enough. So here, I think it's very helpful that we all have people with more than 20 years of experience. Then we allow another 4 weeks, maybe sometimes 6 weeks to finalize this, to do some wordsmithing, to get the numbers from the controlling teams, to get everything ready. But after 4 or 6 weeks, we are ready to go. And then we do a couple of, I would say, management trainings to train what I just said before about how to behave, how to interact with other people. And then quickly soon, so more or less after 6 weeks, latest 2 months, we do start with a regular monthly review. In our experience, it normally does take half an hour, half a day, because people need to learn to really be precise about what they say and what they're going to do. Because it's not anymore a dog and pony show, it's PowerPoint, it's a real number discussion and a fact-based discussion. Depending on where the company is today, it's an easy step. Some others have a longer step to take. Based on that, after a couple of months, and here I would say 3 or 4 months, when we really have the business running, when we have real numbers and real actions, where we have a deviation between plan to actual, then we do perform with these people this reflective problem-solving training. So then we really train people about how to act, how to behave, how to analyze data. This also includes data analytics training, if you want. So we can go as deep as we go into data analytics, because you really have to understand the problem before you run into countermeasure. Then we normally have, for at least half a year, so a couple of months, a little coaching for the team members and the seniors to really apply the topics of the above. It doesn't come overnight. It's kind of coaching session, sometimes a couple of hours, sometimes they come together as it needs. And then the company needs to stabilize itself over the first year. And that's what I said before, over the first year, it's all about stabilization, what we have done above. And only after that, the second year, we do think we can cascade this down into the organization, into other levels of the organizations. And then, of course, depending on the size, we have a number of cascades to go down. So a couple of minutes left before we go to questions. It's about closing thoughts. And really, it is really about full contact sport. In my experience, the discussions we had executing this thing are really hands-on, are really realistic. They are, I would say, they're peacefully and friendly because they apply to rules, but they have a much more higher level of precision than just talk about the nice things. It is really improving the procedural skills or muscles of the corporation and also of the people. People are much more process focused, also in the way how they apply strategy deployment, because strategy deployment is by itself a process to be applied. The third step I like most is really, it is not anymore about filling out PowerPoint presentation for board meetings or whatever, doing nice dog and pony shows for anyone else. It's have your action plans updated, have your numbers updated, and share that with the other guys. So save the time on nice PowerPoints and spend the time on either execution or improving the execution. And that is, I would say, when I observe the company, especially when I do with restructuring companies, it's the most important thing, because these companies do not have the time anymore to write PowerPoints for anyone. They need to improve the financials quickly. And therefore, the complete focus on actions and results is an outstanding advantage of policy deployment or strategy deployment. And of course, well, the people who enter into this kind of approach, they need to be aware that there's something will be different in the future. They will work different in some topics than they've in the past. And if people who do not want to change anything, then maybe strategy deployment is not the right thing to go. But if an organization, maybe in restructuring, I can only repeat myself, they are required to change, no option. There, I would say the willingness to change is much higher. A company which is growing needs to develop the aspiration of growing even faster and then use strategy deployment to go there. It is not a policy to continue as you are, certainly not. If you just continue what you are today and everything should be smooth and easy, then it is the right approach. So I think this page is a nice summary, and I think we have exactly now 15 minutes to share this question from your side.
Okay, Christian, I've got several questions here. I'll just read them to you in order. So the first question is, what are the proper criteria for strategy deployment projects? For example, duration, financials, the amount of team members, etc.?
It's an excellent question. There are three different entry paths. First of all, some companies decide this for an entire company. That's a big decision. You might decide this for an entire department or unit. The unit needs to be somehow, let's say, at least a couple of resources, they need to be inside, and then the other resources can be outside. We are currently using this also to drive two strategic projects which require support from other departments and other functions, other regions outside. Duration should be normally anything north than 1 or 2 years. If something is only for a 1-year thing, maybe, but maybe that's over design. So anything north of 2 to 3 years is helpful. Size in terms of financials, that really doesn't matter. I mean, sometimes it's only 1 million, but it's strategic for the company. Sometimes it's 10 million and maybe it's less strategic. So the question is the change we are making, regardless of financials, in the kind of behavior change that we want, is that fundamental for our organization? And then even a small project can be a very good start for strategy deployment.
The next question: after implementing strategy deployment for about 7 years now, is there an IT tool that you have found to be very helpful in facilitating this process? For example, tools such as Cascade, iNexus, KPI Fire, Smartsheets, etc. So it's a question about, not using Excel and using some of these commercially available softwares that they charge you monthly for.
Interesting enough, a couple of years ago, an IT company was joining our sessions, and they've developed an IT tool exactly matching what I just explained, a one-to-one match in an IT tool. But honestly, I've used the tool, I played with the tool, understood the tool. And I spoke a lot with my guys in restructuring. We not recommend that, because this was our observation, as soon as you use anything like a PMO tool, a data tracking tool, any kind of software tool, people get derailed and focus more on workflow functions, software updates, rather than what is your action plan, what is your KPI, what is your countermeasure. I can give you the context, certainly yes, but my experience, real experience in restructuring, we have no time to play, is stay with a simple one.
The next question is, what is the best way to have management discuss both operational KPIs as well as the strategic execution KPIs?
Very good. I think in many companies, you have a lot of, I would say, numbers, let's say in a factory, which I would call normally factory operating, whatever numbers, which basically illustrate for you how the factory works today. What we then normally do is, when we sit back and look at the strategy deployment, we say, what of the numbers you normally track anyway in your daily business for doing the base business in your factory? What of these numbers, maybe 2 or 3, would be a good indicator if our strategy goes over and above of our base business? So for example, if we are really trying to think about an example, let's say in pricing. Normally in sales, you always have a pricing thing, you do something in pricing, it's always monitored. But if you, for example, have a specific action or a specific, let's say, sub-region or sub-audience, and then you do a sub-target on the specific audience and the specific market, and you check the price development on that, then this can become a so-called target to improve, expressing the execution of your strategy and still being part of your normal base reporting. So it's a double use of the same number.
Okay.
It is also the combination of both.
A lot of companies have strategy, reporting targets, projects, and so on. What are the typical gaps or missing points of strategy deployment that you see in companies?
I normally think that the companies have tons of project initiatives and everything, but they are not sorted, not grouped, and not prioritized. Everyone with a great idea has a new project, approved and run. Within strategy deployment, this is not the case anymore, because whatever touches the ground of policy deployment will have to be sorted into the, and I now go back, screen can be seen, right? Whenever someone comes with a great new idea, the question is, okay, does this add to a breakthrough objective? Here, you see my mouse? No. Then we don't do it. Does it help here? No. Is it a sub-point of this one? No. So even your great idea, for me, it was normally my guys in South America with the great ideas what they could do in South America. Guys, it was not agreed. It doesn't fit to a corporate strategy. It is nice for Brazil, but would be a derailer of the organization, so we are not going to do this. Full stop. So what we normally do in this project, we tell the full basket of projects, and we try to bring it to this sort order. Sometimes we combine them to real strategies. Sometimes we say it's really daily business. You might call it a strategy, but really it's daily business, so not part of this approach. And sometimes we say basically it's too complex. You have to break it down into 2 priorities. So we work pretty hard on collecting all the things you just mentioned, and we try to structure it this way. It will all come to this approach.
Okay. Next question. Can you share your view on the difference between trying to implement strategy deployment in a company that has an established lean system versus a company that does not have an established lean system?
Okay, I would say companies which have a good lean system do much easier because they are normally used to work with numbers in terms of culture set. They normally have at least good operative numbers, so there are numbers to draw from. And they're also used to write precise and logical action plans. What I would not say from my experience that they're better in setting the priorities. That still is an open point, but the underlying values are much more clear if you apply lean before.
Next question. Have you experienced this methodology being successful when driven from within a department within a company without C-level engagement? So how critical is full buy-in from the top down?
Well, what I normally in my implementation, I call it a sneak in. You don't have to have, you have to have the okay. You don't have the, I would say, the power. They don't need to be excited about this. You have to have the go that you can do a try. That is required. And then I think you can start within one department, provide the department, maybe it's not only just 5 people, but it's a department with a certain kind of volume and business decisions to take. You can start in one department, this is what I said, in one unit in a sense, and sneak in left and right over time. Of course, I repeat myself, at least an okay from the boss would be okay, would be appreciable. Maybe he's not behind it at the moment, but he will be soon.
Yeah, and I think this question is related to that. We're trying to get a specific division to use strategy deployment, but they have much resistance. They seem to be open to a partial pilot, but since this is regarding the most important strategies of the division, how do you do it partially? I think you just gave the answer, unless you want to expand upon that.
Yeah, and I think we have a couple of projects. One of them I'm coaching myself, then we do exactly that. So they have a strategic project worth, let's say, not in terms of volume for the moment, but on the long run for the company, very strategic. And they said for these 2 major projects, we do apply strategy deployment as a learning exercise for our management. Because as I said, it's not just about numbers, it's also about management behavior. And they would like